Welcome to the Financial Integrity Hub's podcast. The Financial Integrity Hub pioneers research and explores how law and governance strategies can be designed, implemented and enforced to support anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Identity, a regtech providing financial institutions assurance that they are meeting AUSTRAC reporting obligations. The platform allows regulated entities to gain visibility over transactions, improve auditability, automate manual processes, and reduce the risk of non-compliance. Your host is Isabel Nicholas. Isabel is a researcher at the Financial Integrity Hub. She teaches financial crime at Macquarie Law School and interviews global and domestic experts on trends and market insights for the podcast.
Welcome back to the Financial Integrity Hub's podcast, where I dive into the exciting world of RegTech with Anthony Quinn. RegTech, in the context of conducting money laundering risk assessments, refers to the use of advanced technologies and innovative solutions to streamline, automate, and enhance the process of identifying and assessing money laundering risks faced by businesses and financial institutions. Adopting a risk-based approach is the bedrock for an effective AML program under the AML-CTF Act in Australia. In this podcast, we consider the importance of a risk-based approach to ensure that resources are optimally allocated where the risks are highest. Join us to uncover the key challenges of conducting risk assessments and how proportionate risk weighting plays a crucial role in tailoring AML efforts to the specific threats faced. By leveraging RegTech for money laundering risk assessments, businesses can achieve greater accuracy, efficiency, and consistency in identifying and managing AML risks. It empowers compliance teams to focus on high-value tasks, strengthens their risk management practices, and enhances their ability to meet regulatory requirements effectively. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. You can find this and our previous episodes by searching the Financial Integrity Hub at Macquarie Law School on LinkedIn or on Macquarie University's website. Anthony is the founder and CEO of Arctic Intelligence, an Australian-based but globally focused RegTech firm that was founded in late 2015. It specialises in audit, risk, and compliance software related to financial crime compliance and risk management. In late 2016, Anthony also co-founded AML Accelerate with the goal of developing a cloud-based platform that would help regulated businesses in over 30 industry sectors in conducting enterprise-wide money laundering and terrorism financing risk assessments. In 2018, AML Accelerate was fully acquired by Arctic Intelligence to create a suite of enterprise risk assessment and compliance management platforms. In 2020, Arctic Intelligence was awarded the Australian-founded RegTech of the Year and RegTech Exporter of the Year by the Australian RegTech Association. Prior to founding Arctic Intelligence, Anthony spent over 20 years as a management consultant responsible for implementing a broad range of transformation initiatives across a number of retail and investment banking clients in Europe, the UK, Australia, and the United States. Anthony has also held project leadership roles across numerous risk and compliance programs, including the Future of Financial Advice, the Financial Claims Scheme at Macquarie Bank, Basel II and AML CTF project manager at Westpac, and an operational risk transformation program at the National Australia Bank. Welcome to the Financial Integrity Hub's podcast, Anthony.
Thanks, Isabel. That's quite an intro.
We're happy to have you join us today, and we can get right into it. Risk assessments are arguably the cornerstone of any robust risk and compliance framework. Historically, they've been subjective, inefficient, slow, and infrequent. What does it mean to take a risk-based approach, and why is a risk-based approach to AML important?
Thanks, Isabel. Well, obviously the risk-based approach, I guess, is the opposite to the prescriptive approach where one size fits all. So really the risk-based approach puts the onus on businesses really to identify and assess their risks and vulnerabilities to financial crime. So how can their organisation be exploited by organised criminal networks based on things like the nature, size, and complexity of their business, the types of customers that they're dealing with, the types of products and services they're offering those customers, and the channels that they're using to distribute those products, as well as some of the, I guess, internal business risks and external operating environmental risks, as well as geographic risks. So ultimately, the risk assessment is really a framework to be able to identify and assess money laundering and terrorism financing risks on the one hand, And then once those risks are understood, to be able to essentially sort of design, implement and maintain a control framework that's both appropriate and proportionate to those risks. And that's really what the risk assessment is all about. It's obviously designed to be fluid and ongoing and not just to kind of tick the box and move on. Obviously, risks are continuously changing in terms of like the threat and risk landscape, in terms of, organised criminals come out with new and wonderful schemes to exploit organisations. Obviously, the regulatory compliance landscape's continually evolving as well as the internal and external operating environments that organisations are operating in. So whether that's launching new products or going into new markets or going after different customer segments. And so, having the risk assessment, embedded as part of the risk management framework is really important. So, I think the comment you made, which I was smiling a bit about around historically, they've been subjective, inefficient, slow and infrequent. I think that history is not actually that too long in the past. Like many organisations are still conducting risk assessments very manually, very subjectively on spreadsheets as well. And the net result of that is by the time these risk assessments are actually completed, it could be 6, 9 or 12 months on from when they started, which starts to kind of question the validity of the risk assessment at the time that it's presented based on what is actually current in an organisation's business.
Yeah, that's excellent. A bit more about you personally, Anthony. What inspired you to start Arctic Intelligence?
I set up Arctic in 2015, and prior to that, I was kind of moonlighting, I guess, while I was still kind of working in this space. Prior to that, I'd spent 25 years consulting to different investment retail banks in the UK, in Europe and Australia. And I moved to Australia about 20 years ago, just initially as a gap year, and ended up, as you mentioned, spending some time working on different operational risk and compliance programs at the NAB and Westpac, and then was headhunted by Macquarie to run their anti-money laundering program as the program director for the retail and banking division of that bank, which I did for about 4.5 years. And I was there for sort of 9 years in total as I ran their tax evasion compliance program. And so that was really the last sort of 15 years of kind of consulting was really emerged in the financial crime risk assessment space. And that was what really got me interested and passionate about sort of financial crime prevention and learning around, I guess, the consequences of organised criminal networks in terms of some of the social harm that they can cause through to their illicit activities, and really started to look at how organisations that are essentially well-funded and organised had to deal with it, and some of the challenges that, a major bank would have in complying. And then I started to think around all of the businesses that were about to be regulated. Mind you, this is back in 2010 under the Tranche 2 regulations, as we all know, that hasn't yet happened. So timing is everything. But being on the side of a consulting firm and the side of a regulated entity, trying to understand how could my business be exploited or vulnerable, or what really are the risks that I need to know about, and how do I actually identify and assess those risks. That's something that organisations were really struggling with back then, and I still think are struggling with today. And so we started to look at how do we build technology to help enable companies, regardless of their size or industry sector or geography, to be able to uplift their capabilities. And that's really where Arctic Intelligence and Accelerate came about.
Excellent. Certainly an important gap to fill. And what do the AUSTRAC rules actually say on money laundering and terrorist financing risk assessments?
It's fairly high level in terms of what is described in the AUSTRAC rules, but essentially talks around organisations must understand the risks that their business reasonably face based on the designated services that they offer, in terms of, whether those facilitate money laundering or financing of terrorism. So that's the kind of overall catch-all. But essentially talks around the types of factors that must be considered. So they're really customer types. Are customers basically politically exposed persons, or are they beneficial owners? Who are the beneficial owners of those customers? What is the source of funds and wealth of those customers? So obviously customer is a core part of that, and distinct from customer risk assessments, which are typically conducted as part of the NATO customer requirements, goes much broader than that. It starts to look at the products and services that are offered to those customers, and essentially the characteristics of those products or services that might make those more or less vulnerable from a money laundering perspective. The actual characteristics of a product in terms of, who can invest into the product, how funds are deposited or withdrawn into and out of certain products, types of channels that organisations are using to distribute those products. So are they face-to-face or through non-face-to-face channels? How are they actually interacting with customers? And then it talks about foreign jurisdictions, basically. That's really what the requirements say, but in our mind, there's a lot of things missing in that. So it doesn't really talk about business risks. So obviously it doesn't talk around things like, what's the geographic footprint of a business? Is it a domestic-only operation? Is there international operations? Are there any controls that are outsourced to third parties? And what are the risks associated with that? Well, it doesn't really talk about employee risks or employees that are kind of in key risk roles and how that might impact the overall risk assessment. It also doesn't really talk much around the internal or external operating environments in terms of vulnerabilities to certain types of predicate offences or so on. So our platforms basically take Austrac's guidance, but also build on that from lots of different jurisdictions. We've currently got over 200 clients in about 20 industry sectors and 15 countries. So obviously we look at international guidance, and in our risk assessment platform, we've basically got very flexible frameworks that allows organisations to essentially build their own risk management methodology, change that completely, build their own risk models. We've got kind of content modules for a whole range of financial crime risk disciplines that allow them to be able to essentially deconstruct their Excel-based models, build those inside a framework, apply some proportionality to those risks, and not all risks are treated equally, and essentially have a framework that they can roll out across different organisations, understand real time what the inherent risks are, assess the design and operational effectiveness of the control frameworks and so on. So I think the regulatory guidance is a good starting point, and credit to Austrac, they publish some fantastic guides in terms of industry-specific risks and typologies, which are well worth a read. But obviously, that's only really a starting point from a framework perspective. It needs to become real and operationalised.
Thanks, Anthony. I mean, you did mention some of the key challenges in our conversation just now, but when we consider money laundering or terrorist financing risk assessments, what do you find are generally those key challenges?
There's tons. We could probably have a whole hour on this whole topic, but I think really it's around, like, boards are ultimately accountable for preventing money laundering or the risks, and obviously defining the risk appetite from a board perspective and understanding what that risk appetite is. Are they risk adverse? Are they risk taking? And really, what is the tolerance that an organisation from a board level down is willing to take in order to achieve business objectives? That's often not really well articulated in relation to how it relates to financial crime risk. So that tends to be a challenge. I think in terms of defining, what does a good methodology look like? What are the types of risk groups that I need to consider? We talked a bit about that, but what are the risk categories within those risk groups, and what risk factors should I be considering? What are the types of risk indicators that would indicate, that risk exists within my business? How do I actually assess each of those together, not just individually, but together, to understand what my inherent risk ratings are? And then actually, what types of controls should I be putting in place to mitigate and manage those risks? And how well designed are those controls? Are they present? Are they fit for purpose? Have they actually been implemented? Are they operating effectively? How effectively are they operating, and are there any gaps or deficiencies around how I might go about strengthening the control framework to reduce the overall risk? Often being able to articulate that and to be able to clearly explain and defend kind of the logic that is behind the methodology, and also the decisions that are being made or the judgments that are being given conducting those risk assessments often are well documented. So it can come to the point where those risk assessments are independently audited or subject to some regulatory attention, and those organisations may struggle to articulate the whole process that's being followed. And we talked a little bit around subjectivity or objectivity. That comes up a lot around the level at which subjective judgments should be applied. Are they question driven with predefined or loose outcomes? So traditional approaches to risk assessments are, what's the likelihood, what's the impact? Obviously, you ask 5 different people, you could get 6 different answers. To more involved models where you might automatically calculate the inherent risk rating based on composite of a number of different risk indicators that make up one particular risk factor. So it's just like logic around that versus taking a data-driven approach, which is very objective, and it's most likely that kind of a hybrid is probably the answer. Some subjective, some objectivity. So there's a lot of different challenges around the level of sophistication that people will apply, whether to treat all risks the same. Should all risks be treated proportionately equal to each other, or should there be disproportionality? If there should be disproportionality, what makes one risk more or less risky than another, and having some logic behind that is often kind of a challenge. But ultimately, I think one of the biggest challenges is the approach that people take. And we see some very sophisticated organisations still undertaking these on spreadsheets, which is prone to error, takes a lot of time, and being able to essentially roll out that process to lots of different users across an organisation, gather that information back, be able to understand the decisions that are being made, and actually getting a proper real-time view of the risks that are being assessed. That seems to be a big challenge for a lot of people.
Excellent. Thanks, Anthony. And you did mention, and I'd just like as a final question to ask if you could expand or tell us a little bit about how do you actually determine how to treat risk and when to know, obviously, these things are proportionately weighted, and how do you kind of make that determination?
Well, I guess the thing is there's no right or wrong answer. It just basically, the risk-based approach is really designed to allow organisations to really put in a risk management framework that's appropriate and proportionate to their business. So there's no kind of hard and fast rule, but essentially the nature, size, and complexity. Like if I'm a very complex business with very complicated financial products that I'm offering domestically or internationally, I've got some risks that I'm going to be exposed to. You need to be able to understand and articulate what those risks really are, and then determine how appropriate those risks are and proportionate types of controls you need to put in place to mitigate against those risks. So it's hard to say, right, this is one rule for one, because obviously it's about 30 different industry sectors that are impacted across, from an AML risk assessment perspective anyway, broadly, financial services, gaming, or financial services businesses. Of those, some of them are very, very large, some of them are very, very small, and everything in between. That's what makes it quite difficult to be able to come up with a universal approach. But by utilising some of the technology-enabled approaches that are out there, that helps to drive kind of efficiency and standardisation in that process, make sure that they're based on logic that's explainable and defendable. And it's just something that I think helps drive efficiency in the process as well.
Thank you, Anthony, and thanks again for joining us, sharing your experience and your insights with us today.
Thanks as well. Thanks for having me on.
The Financial Integrity Hub's research equips Australia and the international community with the knowledge, tools and insights to understand, identify and disrupt illicit finance threats. If you're interested in seeing more from the Financial Integrity Hub, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn to see our posts and events. We post a few times each week on breaking news and the latest research. We would like to thank Dr. Doran Goldbarst for his academic advice and Isabel Nicholas for hosting.